A comparative study of the most important methods for forecasting the ICT system's vulnerabilities. Here are the main topics of this presentation. Nowadays, companies are facing plenty of IT attacks. To protect their business, they should detect and forecast the volume of IT security vulnerabilities and be prepared for future threats. A computer system vulnerability can be defined as a weakness within the system or network that might be taken advantage of, to generate damage or to exploit it in some way. The methods of forecasting ITC systems vulnerabilities can be classified in 3 categories. Time series analysis, artificial intelligence, and statistical. ARIMA are general models for forecasting stationary time series. They only give descriptions of the autocorrelations in the data and do not describe trend and seasonality. If the series is not stationary, it is transformed to become stationary. The ARIMA models include autoregressive terms, moving average terms, and differencing operations. Exponential smoothing produces smooth time series. It assigns higher weights to recent observations than to older ones. Single exponential smoothing is applied to data series with no trend or seasonality. Double exponential smoothing is used to forecast data series with trend. Artificial neural networks are inspired by the human brain. They are made up of a set of interconnected components in several layers, called neurons or perceptrons. The inputs of each neuron are connected to the outputs of neurons in the previous layer. The neurons in the first layer get the inputs of the model, and the outputs of the neurons in the final layer provide the result. This is the structure of a neuron. It calculates an output based on the inputs, the weights, the bias, and the activation function. The most widely used activation functions are identity, sigmoid, ReLU, 10H, and SoftPlus. This is a multi-layer perceptron model. It has one input layer, one hidden layer, and one output layer. In this model, the outputs of the hidden layer neurons are connected to the inputs of the output layer neurons, but the model can be extended with more hidden layers. The outputs of the model are given by the final layer of neurons. This is a more compact representation of the multi-layer perceptron model. It contains the input vector, the hidden and the output layers' weights matrices, the hidden and the output layers' bias vectors, the activation functions of the hidden and the output layers, and the hidden and the output layers' output vectors. Training such a model involves adjusting the weights and biases in such a way as to provide an output as close as possible to the correct value for each input. The most widely used methods of training are based on the gradient descent, backpropagation algorithms, or genetic algorithms. This is the structure of a recurrent neural network, designed to process sequential data. RNNs can memorize previous states and use them to determine the current state. The current state is composed by the hidden layer output vector. The state vector calculated at previous step is processed as an entry at current step. The total number of trainable parameters does not depend on the number of steps, but only on the dimensions of the layers. The outputs at the current step depend not only on the entries at the current step, but on their entire evolution, starting from the initial step. The main disadvantage of RNNs lies in the fact that they cannot learn long sequences, because of the vanishing gradient problem. This problem occurs in deep networks with many hidden layers. RNNs do not have long-term memory. The long short-term memory models have been projected to solve this problem. This is the structure of a LSTM cell. This is the current cell state. And this is the hidden state. The model contains a forget gate that decides what information will be forgotten, an input gate, an input updater that decides what information will be kept, and an output gate. The convolutional neural networks are built using 3 types of hidden layers. Convolution layers, that are sparsely connected with the previous layer. They apply convolution operations, using a set of small filters, that contain weights trained to capture different features. Pooling layers, that are also sparsely connected with the previous layer. They have the purpose to downsample data, based on different strategies. Dense layers, that are fully connected with the previous layer. They are similar with the hidden layers of the MLP model. The dense layers are usually placed at the end of the CNN model, before the output layer. Regression models have been widely used to forecast ICT systems software vulnerabilities. Many authors found ARIMA to be the best fit vulnerability model, because it constantly achieves low forecasting errors. Neural networks have multiple advantages over classic models. There is no need to eliminate trend and seasonality. They can produce quality forecasts, even if they work with the original data. The model can be easily generalized to perform multivariate forecasts by increasing the number of inputs. Neural networks can implicitly detect complex nonlinear relationships between dependent and independent variables. The main disadvantage of neural networks lies in the fact that their training is a complex process that requires a lot of processing power, and they can be overfitted. Feed-forward neural nets have been successfully used both to forecast software systems vulnerabilities and in other forecasting applications. Most of the proposed models contain a single hidden layer of neurons. But there are also variants with several intermediate layers. There are several proposals that present optimization strategies to find the best dimension of the input and intermediary layers. Most of the proposed models were trained by the gradient descent and the backpropagation algorithms. But there are also some proposals of evolutionary computation training and hybrid training algorithms that use an adaptive differential evolution algorithm or a particle swarm optimization algorithm. These proposals speculate that evolutionary computational techniques are making significant progress in the first part of the optimization process and manage better to avoid local minima. When evolution begins to stagnate, they switch to gradient descent and backpropagation, which reaches the optimal solution faster. Most of the proposed models use the sigmoid activation function, or the tanh activation function in the hidden layer. But there are other proposals, such as the sinusoidal function. Almost all proposed models use the identity activation function in the output layer. But there are also solutions based on the modified sigmoid activation function. The proposed forecasting models are usually compared with other known techniques: exponential smoothing, Croston's methodology, ARIMA, support vector machines, and vulnerability discovery models, in terms of forecast accuracy and forecast bias. Most of the models trained by gradient descent and the backpropagation algorithms are outperformed by the models they are compared with, but there are also exceptions. The models trained with evolutionary computation, or hybrid algorithms, outperform the other models. The best forecast models proposed recently have LSTM cells in their composition and are trained by backpropagation and gradient descent. CNN models are the most robust to changes in configuration parameters. They perform well for one-step forecasting and less satisfactory for multiple steps forecasting. Different hybrid CNN-LSTM models have been proposed recently. They outperform the other models they are compared with: MLP, CNN, RNN, LSTM, and ARIMA, in all works, even though some authors report longer training times. It is difficult to draw a conclusion because the analyzed works used different datasets. An objective conclusion could be drawn only if all models were tested under the same conditions, on the same datasets. Overcoming all the uncertainties, based on the results analyzed, we can conclude that the latest CNN, LSTM hybrid forecasting models seem to be the most accurate, but they require more complex training. However, the performance of these models must also be proven in the case of software vulnerabilities forecasting. There are several studies that recommend the classic Croston and ARIMA models, as they consistently obtain quality predictions.